Hello, this is Ali, and today we are going to cover all the project management domains and tasks and knowledge and skills used for fulfilling those tasks. This is the latest update that we have for the new PMP exam starting November 1st of 2015. So let's begin and see what the update is, and let's cover all these 5 domains, which are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. So the learning goals we have is these 5 domains and the 47 processes that fall under these 5 domains and the 42 tasks that add up in all these 47 processes that we need to know for the PMP exam, and a total of 47 knowledge and skills that are used by the project manager to fulfill these 42 tasks. So if we look at the processes, the initiating domain has 2 processes, the planning domain has 24 processes, executing domain has 8 processes, monitoring and control has 11, and closing has 2. So this adds to a total of 47 processes. When we get to the task that you see on these right, for each and every single domain, we have a number of tasks. Now for the new PMP exam, starting November 1st, they have added a total of 8 extra tasks in these domains. So what we have now is initiating has 8 tasks that you see over here on this side, which I will cover in a minute. Planning has a total of 13 tasks, which is 24% of your exam. Initiating has 8 tasks, which is 13% of your exam. Executing has 7 tasks, which is 31% of the exam. So even though it has 8 processes and just 7 tasks, it still is the bulk of your exam, being 31%. And the reason being, all the work that is done in the project is done in the execution phase. Monitoring and controlling has a total of 7 tasks and it's 25% of your exam, and closing has 7 tasks and it's 7% of your exam. So even though initiating and closing has 2 processes each, it still adds up to 20% of your exam. So I would suggest you guys to stress a lot on the initiating and the closing domain, because even the PMBOK guide doesn't have a lot of information on these 2 domains. So the new version for the PMP exam even added a lot of new knowledge and skills that you are required to know as a project manager. For example, in initiating, we have a total of 5 knowledge and skills. In planning, we have 17. Executing, we have 7. Monitoring and controlling, we have 10. And closing, we have 8. This adds to a total of 47 knowledge and skills. So we have 47 processes, 42 tasks, and 47 knowledge and skills that we really need to know for our new PMP exam. So let's get to the first domain, which is initiating, which has 2 processes, 8 tasks, and 5 knowledge and skills. The initiating domain is 13% of your exam. So first take a look at what tasks we need to know and complete in the first domain. The first task that we have is perform project assessment based upon available information, lessons learned from previous projects, and meetings with relevant stakeholders. Now, why do we need to do this? Why do we need to do project assessment? Why do we need to look at the lesson learned from previous projects in the initiating domain? Why do we need to meet the relevant stakeholders? Now, the reason why we need to do that, we need to do project assessment in order to support evaluation of the feasibility of the new products or services of the new project. If the given assumptions and constraints are okay, and are we still able to finish the project on time with the given constraints? We need to meet with the relevant stakeholders. Why we need to meet them? So we can identify these stakeholders and we can make sure that the stakeholders are with us throughout the project from the start to the end. Then the task 2 we have is identify key deliverables based on business requirements. So what we are doing over here is we are trying to identify the key deliverables, key things that we are going to deliver to the customer about the project, key requirements. And why we need to do that? In order to manage customer expectations and direct achievement of project goals. Now every task that has been highlighted in bold, these are the new tasks that have been added to the new PMP exam starting in November 1st. So the third task we have here is perform stakeholder analysis using appropriate tools and techniques. So I'm just going to zoom out and we are going to see the two processes that are used in the domain 1, which is initiated. Now the first process is we are developing the project charter, and that is in the integration management knowledge area. And the second process that we go in initiation is all the way down where we are identifying stakeholders. And as you can see, the domains have their own color. So the initiating process group has the green color. When we get to the planning process group, all the processes are going to be in orange color. So it is going to be easier for us to remember as to what process, what tools and techniques, what outputs fall in which process group. So these are the two processes that are used in the initiating domain, which is develop the project charter and identify the stakeholders. So perform stakeholder analysis using appropriate tools and techniques. So we have to identify all the stakeholders that are working towards the project to be successfully completed. So we have to identify who these stakeholders are, and for that we do stakeholder analysis. This we'll see a lot more in detail when we get to the knowledge area of project stakeholder management. So why do we do stakeholder analysis? In order to align expectations and gain support for the project from all these stakeholders. The fourth task we have here is identify high-level risk assumptions and constraints based on the current environment, identify organizational factors, identify historical data, and expert judgment. Now this task is very important for your exam because they will ask questions based on when are high-level risk identified. Then you should know it is going to be in the initiation domain. They can ask you when are high-level requirements identified. Then you should know is the initiation domain. When are the detailed requirements identified? They are identified in the planning domain. So don't get confused over there. So you should know the high-level risk, high-level description, high-level requirements, assumptions, constraints, they are all identified in the initiation domain. And why are we doing these identification? In order to purpose an implementation strategy. The task 5 we have here is participate in the development of the project charter by compiling and analyzing gathered information. Okay, so and we saw development of the project charter is one of the processes in the initiation domain. Why we are developing a project charter? In order to ensure all project stakeholders are in agreement on its element. So we'll have to take a look at what's included in the project charter. The task 6 we have here is obtain charter approval from the sponsor. So unless the project charter is approved, you as the project manager is not going to go ahead with the project, because the project charter will have the high level risk, it will have high level requirements. The project charter will include your name as the project charter, and that's when you have authority to start working on the project and use the resources that are provided to you. So approval of the project charter is very important in the initiation domain. So who authorizes or issues the project charter? Should know it is the sponsor. Who approves the project charter? You should know it is the sponsor. And why does the project charter need approval? So in order to formalize the authority assigned to the project manager and gain commitment and acceptance for the project. So this is where you are authorized. Unless it is signed, unless your name is there, you're really not authorized as a project manager. Okay, and once the charter is approved, you have gained commitment and acceptance for the project. Then task 7 we have is conduct benefit analysis with relevant stakeholders. And why we are doing that is to validate project alignment with organizational strategy and expected business value. So you're doing the benefit analysis. Why is this project and how is this project going to be of benefit? Is it going to increase our sales? It is going to be good for our company? It's going to give a better name? Are we going to make a lot of money out of this project? Are we going to lose money from this project? So all that is done where you conduct benefit analysis. Then the last task we have is inform stakeholders of the approved project charter. So this is the second and this is the third new task that has been added for this exam, for the new PMP exam. As you can see in bold, one is identify key deliverables based on business requirement, conduct benefit analysis with stakeholders, inform stakeholders of the approved project charter. And why we need to inform the stakeholders is to ensure common understanding of key deliverables, milestones, and their roles and responsibilities. So a quick review of all that's done in the initiation domain. One is you select the project manager. The project manager is selected and assigned. You determine the company culture, the company current environment, the organizational factors, historical data, procedures. Another step that could be done in initiation is if you have a large project, then the large project should be divided into smaller phases, and that's done in the initiation phase. Then we have to understand what is the business case, and what's in the business case mostly is going to be why we are taking this project, how it is going to benefit us and the organization. Then what we do over here is looking at the assumptions and constraints, we would create measurable objectives as to if this project can be completed on time, if this project has enough money. So all that measurable objectives need to be created. And you create that looking at the constraints, looking at the assumptions, looking at the high level risk. And then we developed the project charter. And finally, we do stakeholder analysis, where we identify all the stakeholders. And the reason we are identifying all these stakeholders to make sure who is going to be in which part of the project, where we can get their information, where we can make sure that they are participating throughout the project. And that's what primarily the new PMP exam stresses on more, is the stakeholders. So let's get to the knowledge and skills that are used in the initiation domain. We have analytical skills. We have benefit analysis, which is right here. We have elements of the project charter. What all is included in the project charter? Now we are going to see that when I cover the knowledge and skills, we are going to see all these more in detail and what they mean. Then estimation tools and techniques. These estimation tools and techniques are used to estimate how long the project is going to take, approximate how much is it going to cost, estimate the high level risk. Then the strategic management. So these skills we need to know really well as the project manager. So let's get to the next domain, which is planning. Planning is 24% of your exam, and if I zoom out or if I go down, you see the number of tasks that we have. The most tasks that we have in any domain, which is number 13, we have a total of 13 tasks in the planning domain. And if you see 13 tasks over here is bold, so that's the new one that has been added for this PMP exam, which is develop the stakeholder management plan by analyzing needs, interest, and potential impact. So planning is all about, before you start, you have to plan. And we have a total of 24 processes. If you look over here, we have a total of 24 processes in planning. Let's take a really quick look at what these processes are. So now these are in orange. If I go down, we develop the project management plan. We plan scope management. We collect the requirements. We define the scope. We create the WBS, which is the work breakdown structure. We plan the schedule management plan, define activities, sequence activities, estimate activity resource, estimate activity duration, develop schedule, plan cost management, estimate cost, determine budget, plan quality management, plan human resource management, plan communication management, plan risk management, identify risk, perform qualitative risk analysis, perform quantitative risk analysis, plan risk responses, plan procurement management, plan stakeholder management. So we need to know what these 47 processes, what these 24 processes are in the planning domain. In short, we are going to see the tasks that are used in these 24 domains. So let's see the first task. This is where we review and assess detailed project requirements. Now, it's important that you see the detailed over here. Remember the first one? We had high level. Now, we are not high level anymore. When we are in planning, we are going to we are going to produce detailed project requirements. Now this will happen in the scope management knowledge area. Then we are going to look into the constraints and assumptions with stakeholders based on the project charter, lesson learned from any previous projects, and by using requirement gathering techniques. So this is the scope management area where, how we gather these requirements, how detailed these requirements need to be, what are the constraints and assumptions of these requirements. And a lot of this we'll even get from the project charter, because the project charter has high level requirements, high level risk assumptions in there. And why are we doing this? In order to establish detailed project deliverables. So using all these inputs, we can establish a detailed project deliverable report. Then we have task 2, which is develop a scope management plan based on the approved scope and using scope management techniques. So as we saw when I was going through these processes, 24 processes, every knowledge area has a management plan. Like scope has scope management plan, time has time management plan, cost has cost management plan, communication management plan, stakeholder management plan, human resource management plan. So all these knowledge areas that we have, each has a management plan. So that's what we see over here. Once we create these plans, which is the cost, the scope, the human resource, communication, procurement, quality, once we create these plans, we have to make sure that these plans are approved. And the person to approve all these plans before we go ahead in execution is going to be the project sponsor. A lot of times they will ask a lot of questions on these. Who's going to approve these? What needs to be done before you go to the next step? So you have to make sure if that plan is approved and it's approved by the sponsor. So we develop a scope management plan in order to define, maintain, and manage scope of the project. Develop the cost management plan in order to manage project cost. Develop the project schedule in order to timely manage completion of the project. Now to create the project schedule, you will use programs like Microsoft Project. Even in cost management plan, you will use Microsoft Project, where you assign cost to each and every identified tasks that was identified in the scope management plan. Then you develop the human resource plan. Why do we do that? In order to maintain project organizational structure and provide guidance regarding how resources will be assigned and managed. Then we develop the communication management plan in order to manage the flow of project information. Communication is one of the most important things that the project manager does. A project can fail if the communication is not good. Okay, so we create a communication management plan to make sure that all the information that we have is equally shared among the respective team members or the stakeholders. Because without communication, when you're working in a big project, the successful completion of the project is next to impossible. Okay, so that's what's happening in the communication management plan, where we manage how the flow of project information is going to go and how everything is going to be distributed, how everyone is going to have access to these information. Develop the procurement management plan based on the project scope, budget, and schedule. Why? In order to ensure that the required project resources will be available. Then we develop the quality management plan in order to prevent the occurrence of defects and control the cost of quality. So So obviously you want to create a quality management plan to make sure that everything is on the quality that we promised to give it to the customer, and we have to make sure that it doesn't have defects, because if it has defects, then you will have to redo the whole thing. Okay, you will have to fix the quality. Then we have developed the change management plan. Now when we are going through the project, no matter what, you will have some change request that comes in. Change request can come in the execution phase, can come in the monitor and control phase. So whenever there's a change request that comes from maybe the stakeholder, the customer, the team member, what are we going to do about that? So for that, you need to develop a change management plan, and that will define how the changes will be addressed and controlled. So if we have a change request, what steps need to be taken to take care of that change. So in order to track and manage change, very important for your exam, lot of questions on change management. Plan the risk management plan by developing a risk management plan, identifying, analyzing, and prioritizing project risk, creating the risk register, and define risk response strategies. So during the beginning, you want to identify the risk. In the initiation phase, what we did is we identified high level risk. Now in the planning, we have to identify detailed risk. Okay, so we are not high level anymore. So we identify detailed risk, analyze, and we prioritize the project risk. Which one is more important? Which one might come first? Which risk is not that important? So we prioritize them. We create the risk register, which is going to be where all the risk that you have identified are going to be stored in the risk register, and define risk response strategies, where we are going to already define, if this happens, this is what we are going to do. If this happens, this is how we're gonna manage it. So why we are doing this? In order to manage uncertainty and opportunity throughout the project life cycle. Then the task 11 we have here is present the project management plan to the relevant stakeholders according to the applicable policies and procedures. And why we need to give it to the stakeholders? As I say, there's a lot of stress on stakeholders in the exam. So in order to obtain approval to proceed with project executions, so we give we keep the stakeholders on, and we show them these plans, and we get an approval, and they agree to how we are going to go ahead with the project, because planning is all about how we are going to go forward, how we are going to execute this, how we are going to manage this, how we are going to control this. So we get the stakeholders on board for the approval process. Then task 12 is conduct kickoff meeting, communicating the start of the project, identify key milestones and other relevant information. So now all your project management plans are approved, and the person who is approving these are the stakeholders. Primarily is going to be the project sponsor. So once all these plans are approved, with the risk management plan, cost management plan, change management plan, scope management, all these plans are approved, then we conduct kickoff meeting and communicating the start of the project. This is when your project is going to really start. We identify key milestones and other relevant information. And why we are doing that? In order to inform and engage stakeholders and gain their commitment. The last task we have in planning is develop the stakeholder management plan by analyzing needs, interest, and potential impact. This is the one in bold, so this is the newly added one, even though even the previous PMP exam already had the stakeholder management plan. And why we are doing this? In order to effectively manage stakeholders' expectations and engage them in the project decisions. Okay, so we developed the stakeholder management plan. If you want to take a look, I'll go all the way down to the stakeholder knowledge area. So see, plan stakeholder management, and over here we have already developed the stakeholder management plan. Now let's see the knowledge and skills used during all these 13 tasks. Okay, so the skills used are change management planning, cost management planning, including project budgeting tools and techniques, communication planning, the different types of contracts and the selection criteria. Okay, types of contracts and selection criteria. Then we have estimation tools and techniques. How do we estimate cost and time? Then we have human resource planning. Then we have lean and efficiency principles, procurement planning, how the procurement is done, quality management planning, requirements gathering, then what skills are used for gathering requirements, example planning sessions, brainstorming, and focus groups. Then we have to consider the regulatory and environmental impact assessment planning, risk management planning, scope deconstruction, where we create the work breakdown structure, scope backlog, scope management planning, stakeholder management planning, time management planning, including all the scheduling tools and techniques, and workflow diagramming techniques. We'll be covering all these knowledge and skills in detail later on. Now let's get to the third domain that we have is executing. Now this domain is 31% of your exams. So the maximum number of questions are asked from the executing domain. We need to know we have a total of 7 tasks and we have a total of 8 processes that happens during the executing process group. Let's take a look at real quick look at the processes that happen in the executing and managing domain. We have the first process as direct and manage project execution. This is happening in the integration management knowledge area. Then we jump straight to the quality knowledge area where we perform quality assurance. Then we go to the human resource knowledge area where we acquire the project team, develop the project team, and manage the project team. So the majority of the executing processes are in the human resource management knowledge area. We go down, we have manage communications in the communications management knowledge area, and we have conduct procurement in the procurement management knowledge area, and the last one we have manage stakeholder engagement in the stakeholder management knowledge area. So these are the 8 processes in the executing and managing process group. Now let's see what happens in the executing and managing domain. We have a total of 7 tasks, out of which the last 2 tasks were added for the new exam, which is manage the flow of information by following communication management plan, in order to keep stakeholders engaged and informed. Then the task 7 we have is maintain stakeholder relationships by following the stakeholder management plan. Again, see, I'm telling you, they're stressing a lot on stakeholders. So why do we maintain relationship? In order to receive continual support and manage expectations. The task 1 we have is acquire and manage project resources by following the human resource and procurement management plans. So we acquire the human resources who are going to work on our project. We're going to use the procurement management plan as well. And why we need to do this? In order to meet project requirements. So all the project requirements are going to be met once we hire these human resources and they start working on the project. Task 2 is manage task execution based on the project management plan by lending and developing the project team. So as I said before, in the planning, we have a project management plan which includes all these subsidiary plans from the different knowledge areas. So we manage the execution based on the project management plan, based on the scope management plan, based on the time management plan, cost management plan, human resource management plan. So we are going to manage the whole execution based on the plan by leading and developing the project team in order to achieve obviously project deliverables. Then task 3 is implement the quality management plan using the appropriate tools and techniques. So we are going to get to the quality management plan and we implement that using the tools and techniques for maintaining the quality in order to ensure that the work is performed in accordance with the required quality standards. So all the quality standards are going to be listed in the quality management plan that we need to follow, or the team needs to follow, to successfully complete the project and have the deliverables accepted by the client. Then task 4 we have implement approved changes and corrective actions by following the change management plan. Why we are doing this? In order to meet project requirements. Now when we are in the execution phase, we find some problems, stakeholders find some problems, team finds some problems, then they request a change request, and then we go through the whole change request following the change management plan in the planning process group, and if it is approved, we implement the approved changes and corrective actions, and for doing that we follow the change management plan. It's a very important for your exam, the change management plan, the change process, the change request, how does it come, who does it go to, what is the process. So we'll see this when we get more in detail. Then task 5 is implement approved actions by following the risk management plan. Now obviously we follow the risk management plan and we implement these actions. These risks were identified before, and when these risks happen during the execution phase, what are we going to do? So we are going to follow our plan of identified risk and our responses of what we were going to do if this happens. And why we do this? In order to minimize the impact of risk and take advantage of opportunities on the project. Then we have task 7, which is manage the flow of information by following the communication management plan to make sure stakeholders are engaged and informed. It is very important that the stakeholders need to know what's going on, that they are on board with the project. Then maintain stakeholder relationship by following the stakeholder management plan. So the 7 knowledge and skills used here, which we are going to look later in a lot more in detail, is the continuous improvement plan. How do we continually improve upon the quality of the project? The contract management techniques. How do we manage the different contracts? What techniques are used? Elements of the statement of work. What all needs to be done in the project is going to be in the statement of work. Interdependencies among project elements. How the project elements depend with each other. Then we have project budgeting tools and techniques to budget to get the right cost. What techniques are we going to use? Then quality standard tools. How do we maintain the quality standard? And vendor management techniques. How do we manage the vendors in our project? So that takes care of this domain. Then we have the fourth domain, which is the monitoring and controlling. We have a total of, in monitoring and controlling, we have a total of 11 processes. So we're going to take a quick look at those 11 processes. If you have a look over here, we have two new tasks that have been added to the monitoring and controlling domain. But before that, let's go take a quick look at the monitor and control processes. The first one we have in the project integration management is monitor and control project work. Basically, we are going to follow the project management plan, which will tell us how the monitoring and controlling of the project should be done. Project work should be done. Then this is the important one, which is perform integrated change control. You have a lot of questions on this. As I said before, how the change is requested, how is it going to go through, who is going to request the change, who is going to approve the change, what is the work of the project manager when there is a change request, and all that. So perform integrated change control, that's the second process. Then we have validate scope, which is in the scope management knowledge area. Now before we close the project, we have to validate everything that we have done so far, that we have completed. We validate all the tasks that have been completed according to the project management plan, according to the quality management plan, to see if everything looks good, everything is as supposed to as it was in the plan and even in the contract. And we need to validate the scope of all these tasks and everything being completed before we go ahead and close the project, or before closing happens. Then we have controlling the scope. Now scope can go out of hand. The customer can keep requesting and keep adding more and more changes and can go out of hand. So as a project manager, you have to make sure you're controlling the scope. This again will happen in the scope management knowledge area. Same thing we have over here is control the schedule, which is controlling the time. Now these are the constraints: the scope, the schedule, and the cost. We have to manage these triple constraints for our project. If one thing changes, it is going to affect the other constraint. So you have to control the schedule, make sure we finish everything on time and we are on track. Then we'll have to control the cost. As I said, there are the three constraints. If one changes, the other changes. So you have to monitor and control them very closely for the project. Then we have to control the quality. Again, this is a constraint. If quality is affected, then everything else is going to get affected. So we have to make sure that the quality is according to the plan, according to the specifications that were agreed to. Then we control the communications. Very important. Unless you're able to communicate, unless the team is able to communicate, unless the stakeholders are able to communicate well, the project is going to fail. So you have to even control the communications and see that the communication is going the way it is supposed to be, and that should be in your communication management plan in the planning knowledge area. And then we have is controlling the risk. We have identified all the detailed risk in the planning. Now what we need to do here is to control the risk. It's not like you identify them and you just keep them aside. You have to be on top of it. When is this risk going to happen? And has the risk passed already, or the risk still there? So you are going to identify the risk, and you're going to make sure you're going to reassess the risk. So many things that you'll be doing, covering these tools and techniques in the control risk. And the last one we have, last but not the least, is the control procurement. We control the procurement, all the work that went out to the vendors. So we control that to make sure that the work is being done according to the agreement, according to the contract. And the last one we have is obviously controlling the stakeholders. This happens in the stakeholder management knowledge area. We control them to make sure that they are actively participating in the project. So let's go up and take a quick look at the tasks that were identified. We have a total of 7 tasks and 10 knowledge and skills. The first task is measure project performance using appropriate tools and techniques in order to identify and quantify any variances and corrective actions. So you measure how the performance is going in the project. If it's slow, if it's fast, are we spending more money? Are we, behind the budget, over the budget? So all that we are going to look into the performance, and we identify and quantify the variance. So we had planned to spend this much money at this time. We've already spent so much. So now what are we going to do? Okay, so we do that. We manage changes to the project by following the change management plan that was identified in the planning process. We verify that project deliverables conform to quality standards established in the quality management plan by using appropriate techniques. Now, if your project is not done according to quality, then again your project is going to fail because the customer is not going to accept the deliverables. So it has to be according to the quality management plan to meet the project requirements and the business needs of the customer. Then task 4, we have monitor and assess risk by determining whether exposure has changed and evaluating the effectiveness of response strategies in order to manage the impact of risk and opportunities on the project. Then we review the issue log, update if necessary, and determine corrective actions by using appropriate tools and techniques. In the issue log, all the issues are going to be listed. The issue log, the team has access to the issue log. You might have a stakeholder issue log where the stakeholders have access to all the issues. And what you have to do is make sure that the issue log is updated if necessary. You have to make sure all the issues are resolved from the issue log. So this will minimize the impact on the project, because if the issues are not solved, then the project is going to get impacted and delayed. Then task 6 and 7, these are the new ones where we capture, analyze, and manage lesson learned using lesson learned management techniques. This is very important, where we capture all the lesson learned. Okay, why were we delayed? Why did we spend more money? How did we spend less money? How did we finish this sooner? How did we not finish it on time? So all these need to be part of the lesson learned documentation. Now these lesson learned documentations are going to be used by future project managers for similar projects. So you're going to capture, analyze, and manage these documents. So you're going to analyze the previous lesson learned documents from the previous similar project and try to use that and not make the same mistakes in your new project. So why we're doing this? In order to enable continuous improvement. Then task 7, which is monitor procurement activities according to the procurement management plan. Now obviously we have a procurement management plan. If you want to take a look, I can go down really quick. Procurement management plan is going to be in the procurement management knowledge area, and it is right here, the procurement management plan. So we have to make sure that we follow the procurement management plan. Monitor procurement activities according to the procurement management plan in order to verify compliance with project objectives. Okay, so let's take a look at the 10 knowledge and skills we need to know as project managers in the monitor and control domain. One is performance measurement and tracking techniques, where you're going to measure these performance. You're going to use the different earned value formulae, the PERT analysis, the trend analysis, and you're going to measure. These are all measuring techniques. How to measure the performance, how to measure how much money we've spent so far, how much more money we need, how long it's going to take, some estimation techniques, what's the trend that is right now, are we going on the correct trend, or are we behind, or are we ahead. So that's done in the performance measurement. Then we have process analysis technique. What process are we using? Okay, so we analyze that process. Are we using lean? Are we using Kanban, Six Sigma? What process are we using? What methodology are we using? So we analyze if we are using that and we're using the correct techniques. Then the third one is project control limits. What is the project thresholds, the project tolerance, the different limits, project finance principles, project monitoring tools and techniques, a lot of tools and techniques to monitor projects, project quality, best practices and standards. What standards are we using? Are we using the ISO standards, the BS standards, CMMI standards, IEEE standards? So we need to know what these standards are, and we need to follow these standards depending on our contract. Then quality measurement tools. How do we measure the quality? Using statistical sampling, control charts, flow charting, inspection, assessment. Risk identification and analysis technique, risk response techniques, quality validation and verification techniques. So all these techniques are even used in the planning process group. Now, one thing you need to know, these knowledge and skills, they are not just with respect to just one domain. These knowledge and skills could be used in planning. The planning knowledge and skills could be used in executing, depending on the process you are in. So they are not just dependent to one process group. Okay, so one thing that we need to remember is the knowledge and skills can be, some knowledge and skills are used throughout in all the 5 process groups. Okay, so as I said, remember, it's not just related to one process group. These knowledge and skills can be used in any of the process groups depending on the process you are in. And even the PMBOK guide says that. So let's do the last one that we have is closing. And as I said before, closing has just 2 processes. Just like initiating has 2 processes, closing has 2 processes as well. It is 7% of your exam. And in closing, PMI did not add any new task. Okay, but if you saw in the other ones, every domain they added 1 or 2 tasks. Over here you have 2 in monitor and control, 2 in executing, you have 1 in planning, then you have 3 in initiation. So but in closing they did not add any new task. Okay, but we do have the knowledge and skills, 8 knowledge and skills, which we are going to see in a minute. Let's take a quick look at the 2 processes that we have. One is close project or phase. This is in the project integration management knowledge area, where it shows how we're going to close the project or phase. Now again, the project management plan will tell how the closing should be done, closing of the project or phase should be done. And then the second process is all the way down in the procurement management knowledge area, where we have close procurements. How do we close procurements? What needs to be done during closing procurements? So let's take a look at the tasks that are there that we need to know really well for the exam, because as I said, we don't have a lot of information even in the PMBOK from the initiating and closing phase. But if you add these 4 processes, 2 from closing, 2 from initiating, it comes to 20% of your exam. So there's a lot of questions on that, so you better know each and every task really well, and most of this will come with experience. You know, if you're a project manager and you work with initiation and you work with closing, then you shouldn't have any problem answering the questions based on these. So the first task we have is obtain finals acceptance of project deliverables from relevant stakeholders. So you need to know, unless you have a final acceptance from the stakeholders, you cannot close the project. Okay, so final acceptance confirms that project scope and deliverables were achieved. Now, how do you get to the final acceptance? You have to make sure that all your deliverables had been accepted. Okay, and you have it accepted by verifying, by verifying the scope. Okay, that happens in the monitor and control process group. Once that gets done, then you get to the closing, where the scope is verified, everything is verified. We need to get the final acceptance in order to confirm that the project scope and deliverables were achieved. Then transfer the ownership of deliverables to the assigned stakeholders in accordance with the project plan in order to facilitate the project closure. You obtain financial, legal, and administrative closure using generally accepted practice and policies. So you have to obtain financial closure, that all the money transaction has been done, all the legalities have been taken care of, and you do an administrative closure using the accepted practices and policies of the organization or whatever is there in the contract. And you do this in order to communicate formal project closure and ensure transfer of liability. Then you have task 4, where you prepare and share the final project report according to the communication management plan. So the communication management plan will say how you're going to share the final project report in order to document and convey project performance and assist in project evaluation. So how did the project go? How was the project performance? So you are going to prepare the project final report for that. Now this will be used as even lesson learned documents for future projects. So the next task we have, task 5, is collate lessons learned that were documented throughout the project and conduct a comprehensive project review. What happens is the lesson learned. Now some questions were asked in the exam as to when does the lesson learned happen during the project. You have to know the lesson learned is not something that happens only in the closing phase or closing domain. lesson learned happens throughout the project. Okay, so you have to remember that for the exam. So lesson learned happens throughout the project, but during closing you are putting it all together and making sure you create a comprehensive project review. Now, why we are doing that? In order to update the organization's knowledge base. So these lesson learned are going to go into the organization's knowledge base, which will be used by future project managers for any future similar projects. We have task 6, which is archive project documents and materials using generally accepted practices. So how do we have to save all these documents and materials in digital format, in printed format. We have to archive them and save it according to the company policies, procedures, and practices. Why we're doing this again? In order to comply with statutory requirements and for potential use in future projects and audits. Obtain feedback from relevant stakeholders using appropriate tools and techniques and based on stakeholder management plan. Why are we doing this? Because feedback for any organization is very important. Okay, when I am providing a certain service or when I do a certain project, for me it's very important to receive a feedback from my stakeholders. Did I do good? Did I do bad? And how can I make it better? So we are doing this in order to evaluate the satisfaction. So if the stakeholder is happy, obviously the stakeholder will come back for another project. Now this finishes the 7 tasks in the closing domain. Only thing that we're gonna quickly see is what are the skills we need to know as a project manager. We need to know the skills for archiving practices and statutes. How do we archive all the documents, practices? How do we save these files? What format do we follow? Compliance, statute, organization. Contract closure requirements. How do we make sure that the requirements were satisfied, and how do we close these requirements? Obviously by validating the scope. Then close out procedures. What happens during closeout of the project? Feedback techniques. How do we get feedback from the stakeholders? Performance measurement techniques, KPI and success factors. Then we have project review technique and transition planning technique. Now, how do we transition from now the project is done? How do we hand over to the stakeholder, to the customer? So all that is going to be in your closing domain. So this finishes the review for all the 5 domains according to the latest PMP exam that is going to start in November 1st. Okay, so all they have added is 8 tasks, and then they added to some of the knowledge and skills that you can see, and these knowledge and skills can be used in whichever domain that it might be finding useful. All right, so this is Tutor Ali, and I hope you guys understood this project management domains, task, knowledge and skills overview. Thank you for watching.